Hello everyone. I'm Dr. Abhinav Mohan, Leader Department of Prosthodontics. Today I'm going to discuss a topic on prosthodontic rehabilitation, its significance and centric relation. So before we start with, let us see what is the masticatory system. And we all know that the masticatory system can be considered as a triangle with three ends. And basically the starting with teeth, you know what are the basic components of teeth like enamel, dentin, and pulp, and you have your periodontium, which consists of gingiva, bone, and periodontal membrane. And finally, you have your articulatory system, which has the temporomandibular joints, the muscles, and finally the occlusion with the teeth. So before we start and go ahead, let us see what is the goal of an occlusal therapy. So we're talking about prosthodontics. We're talking about rehabilitating a patient prosthetically. So the ultimate aim of a prosthodontic therapy is to achieve a stability and a harmonious relationship between your glenoid fossa, the condyle, the temporomandibular joint, your teeth, and all other masticatory, neuromasticatory components. So, but for that, you to know about your temporomandibular joint, where you have your glenoid fossa of the cranium, which acts as a socket for your joint, into which your mandible is placed, which acts as a lever arm with the fulcrum, which opens and closes like a hinge. So, for your hinge to open and close, you need to have a complex disc, which is the only way for that mandible to come out of the joint and move. So that is how it is. And the movements are further controlled by the presence of your temporomandibular joint ligaments. And finally, when it comes to function, you need to have your muscles of mastication, the muscles, masticatory muscles, the primary as well as the accessory muscles, which are responsible for your various mandibular movements. So, so what is the role of teeth in this masticatory system? So, as of without the function of your jaws, the teeth itself does not have any role in this temporomandibular joint or your masticatory system. Once your jaw-to-jaw relationship is established, there comes the teeth, which has got its role, where you need to have it in harmony with the jaws. So, as I said before, the basic goal of prosthodontic rehabilitation is to achieve stability in occlusion. And to achieve the stability, centric relation is our starting point. So, any rehabilitation we are planning to do, centric relation is our starting point. So, now I'm going to focus more on centric relation. We're going to see the definition. I would like to correct it as definitions, various definitions of centric relation, the significance of centric relation, and what are the methods of recording. So we'll be initially discussing about the definition and the importance of centric relation. Centric relation, as the term implies, centric is actually adjective that means it is centered. So the position or the condyle is centered into your temporomandibular joint or the articular fossa. So the medial poles of your condyle are centered in the middle of the medial third of the fossa. The pictures are self-explanatory. And now, so this is what which we don't normally discuss much. So there has been a lot of study and research which has been undertaken by various researchers or various scientists to find out the exact functional anatomy of this temporomandibular joint. To start with that, in 1920, McCullum he described centric relation as the rearmost position of the condyle to the articular fossa. So later in 1952, Granger, he modified through his findings. It is considered as uppermost, rare, and rearmost position. Later, it was Stewart in 1969 who considered or who gave the concept of RUM, where he considered it as rearmost, uppermost, and midmost position. So with this, we can see the varying definitions or varying position of centric relation. over years of research. Further, in 1977, American Equilibrium Society considered it as the most anterior and uppermost position of condyle opposite the slope of articular eminence. Later, Salenza in 78 considered condyle disc assembly brace superiorly and anteriorly against the posterior slope of articular eminence. And finally, in 1987, the American Equilibrium Society, exactly 10 years later, the initial definition which they advocated, modified it or revised it as the thinnest avascular portion of the disc in the anterior, most superior position of dorsal slope of emin. So here, by now, we have already seen almost six definitions conveying the change in position of centric relation over the years of research. Further coming down. So finally, where do we stand right now? I have started with the most primitive definitions which is being proposed to the most recent one, that is the GPT, that is Glossary of Prosthodontic Terms, which is released as the 10th edition in 2023, where it states centric relation is a maxillomandibular relationship. It is independent of tooth contact. So it's a pure bone to bone relationship in which the condyles articulate in the anterior superiormost position against the posterior slopes of articular eminences. So in this position, what they have highlighted is the mandible is restricted to purely rotatory movements. And from this unstrained physiologic and maxillomandibular relationship, the patient can make the various jaw movements. That is the vertical, the lateral, and protrusive movements. It is clinically useful, repeatable reference position. So this definition has evolved more from an anatomical side to be more like a functional definition depicting the position of centric relation. So with this, now we move on to the reasons. What changed over the period since I have focused from 1920s to 2023, over 100 years, more than 100 years? What has changed? So the change of definition from most retruded position to uppermost does not make a concept of centric relationship or centricity so obsolete, because it is the amount of knowledge which we gain and the functional anatomy which we are understood from the human body has changed. So what it is basically the better understanding of the anatomy of the joint, in particular to the disc alignment and the medial poles of the condyles. So you need not get worried why the centric relation has changed over years. The position itself has changed. No, the position has been there. It has been there. It will be there. And only the way you express that position has been modified with the various definitions. So the change in definition hasn't changed the way it has been recorded for. And one more important thing. So whatever has changed, the way you record it, it remains the same. Whatever methods which we are going to discuss in the further sessions, the methods remains the same. So now there are authors, there are articles and researchers and publications commenting that centric relation is a precise point. So there is an apex, a point of force at the uppermost bone stalk, at the medial part. You can see in this picture. So you have a point where no movement is possible unless that particular joint assembly moves down that particular bony slope. So this is that precise point where it is going and staying. So that particular point where you can apply a lot of pressure, where it can be reproduced repeatedly and number of times. That is more important. That is why you have this particular centric relation now joint. So as I said, the studies, so many studies have found out that the repeatability of this particular precise point. So the uppermost position, there is no, it's not a flat areas or at the apex. So only a downward movement which is possible from this apex has been recorded. So as I said, so you have this point, it has been there. So the significance, each one of this, the reproducibility, the ability of this particular point to be repeatedly recordable is the most significant part of centric relation. So recording again, when we move on to how recording and accurate centriculation is the most important step for a prosthodontic rehabilitation. So it is very cost effective, time effective, trouble-free restorative and prosthodontic therapy has to happen. You need to have a proper record of your centriculation. So centriculation is now considered as a universally acceptable jaw position because it is more of a physiologic and biomechanically correct. We don't emphasize on the term unstrained position. When we say unstrained, it is not about the muscles which is unstrained. Whenever there is more mandibular movement, the muscles are strained. The muscle stays not in its unstrained position, that is its tonic contractive position, only when it is in its musculoskeletal stable or physiologic rest position. Other than that, the stability of your joint, the strain the joint receives has been considered with respect to the ligaments. So we are talking about those ligaments which are unstrained. So when you have your centriculation position, the ligaments are considered to be totally unstrained and it is more in its physiologic state. So that is again an importance of centriculation. So further we have it's the only jaw position that permits interference-free occlusion. So that is another important thing. You don't want to have any kind of interferences when the mandibular closure happens. So that is another important thing. And a properly aligned condylar disc assembly in centric relation can resist maximal loading of your elevator muscles with no sign of discomfort. So the closure, the maximum amount of force applied, it can be well tolerated at this particular position. And all movements start from this point and end up in this point. So hence it is called as home of mandible. So that is where your mandible is actually occupying in your skeleton, facial skeleton. That is the home for your mandible. That is where it is actually suspended. So these are the various important aspects of centriculation. Again, as I said, it is consistent, reproducible, repeatable, and recordable, and it acts as a reference point. So to start with, any prosthetic rehabilitation involving a total correction of the occlusion of that particular patient, you need to record patient-centric relation. So as a reference point, it serves as the institution of occlusal rehabilitation in dentulous condition. And again, it also acts as a reference point and as a reliable guide to develop centric occlusion in case of complete dentures or processes where you don't have any kind of guide or what do you say, any kind of occlusal intercuspation. So that is where again the centric relation has more significance. So with that, for the time being, we have discussed about centric relation, the various definitions of centric relation, and what are the meaning of these different definitions, how these different definitions actually evolve, and where do we stand exactly right now, and what is the significance of centric relation. In the further session, coming session, we will have a detailed discussion on what are the various methods of recording centric relation in dentulous or partially dentulous as well as completely dentulous patients for prosthetic rehabilitation. That's all for now. Thank you.